Vic, welcome to the show.
Steve, thank you so much for having me on. Pleasure to be
And
here.
yeah, I mean, you were in the area when or did you come all the way in from Watertown?
I actually live in Waltham, but no, I drove in.
That's a long distance.
I've got a way to go through Belmont that takes me about 20 minutes to get here.
Well, Vic is going to be on tonight. Vic is a master repairman of vintage audio equipment,
Yeah.
and he works at a very good store in Harvard Square in the garage. Vic, just tell us a little bit about the store for our viewers so that they know what it is and what they can get there that they can't get hardly anyplace else.
Well, Audiolab, first of all, is the, I believe, oldest hi-fi store in the greater Boston area. We opened in 1965 on Elliott Street, right around the corner from Harvard Square, and then in 1991 we moved to our current location at the garage, which is at 36 JFK Street, and we carry all fine speakers, turntables, receivers, and other quality hi-fi components, both
And you
new
have
and used.
And you have a boatload of know-how there between you and Michael, right?
Yeah, between me and Michael. I mean, Michael, who runs the front end of the store, he's been doing hi-fi for, I think, close to 40 years.
He lives and breathes hi-fi.
He's there every day.
And 7 days a week, yes.
Yes.
And you are a musician, and you got into hi-fi because you liked, you were interested in using an amplifier, an old-fashioned amplifier that has tubes.
Exactly.
And again, Audiolab, I'm sure you are Googleable.
Yes, indeed.
Facebook.
Yep, we are on the Facebook, we are on the Google, we are on Yelp and all of those other social media things.
And who is your media person? I mean, who?
It's Mike. I mean, it's between me and Mike.
I mean, but he does for example, he does the website and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Although we're looking to change up the actual website, but Mike handles all of the social media stuff on Facebook. He updates pretty regularly, actually.
Oh, really? Well, again, Audiolab in the garage, second floor. It's a great store. Great. You can get a lot of free advice there and expert advice either in repair or what kind of equipment you have, etc., etc. And we got into a discussion about smoking because I said to you, Vic, I said that I thought it was egregious that in the Affordable Care Act, that if one person went in who is a heroin addict, obese, diabetic, with hepatitis C, that person could not be charged more for medical insurance, but if another person who had absolutely no diagnosed medical conditions, in other words, appeared to be in perfect health, but he used tobacco, that person could be charged 50% more. And you felt that was fair.
Yeah, I mean, if the number is 50%, I think that might be a little steep. But, I believe that if you are a healthy person and you are engaging in risky activities, whatever they may be, even though, of course, smoking is legal and being a heroin, using heroin.
Well, heroin is an illegal activity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, wait, that's an illegal activity, but it's considered risky.
Yeah. But, I mean, what I would say is that if you're looking to play with fire, which is what smoking cigarettes is,
Yeah.
then I think that there should be at least a little bit of a reasonable add-on to cover for the fact that you eventually might end up being ill and being that person who is a weight on the system.
Well, what about someone who is overweight? Obviously eats a lot of McDonald's, let's say does some heavy drinking. What about that person? Should that person be, let's say, penalized somewhat?
I would say, see, this is where we get into how much should the government tell us how to live our lives, and
Yes, it's a good question.
And it's a good question, and I would totally agree that I think it's unfair for the government to tell me I shouldn't be smoking, equally, I think it's unfair for the government to tell me I can't have a cheeseburger if I want one. However, if I personally am overusing any particular thing, it's my choice. And therefore, I think there should be some accountability with that choice.
Well, and that account, but then again, why does the Affordable Care Act single out smokers out of all the risky activities? And there's some sports that are risky: skiing, playing football, race car driving, overeating, over drinking, using illegal drugs. All of these things are very risky. All of these things can end up in making someone ill. Why is it that the government chooses only tobacco?
I think personally that maybe the government should lay off the tobacco a little bit, but still apply a little bit of pressure, but spread that pressure around on other risky activities. Because we all live in a society, so it's like living in Cambridge, right?
Yes.
And you could choose to never leave your apartment.
Right, that would be very safe, I guess, right?
It would be very safe. And then you could claim, well, because I don't use the subway at the
Right.
winter time, I don't go outside, so why am I paying for snow shoveling, all of this other stuff?
Yes.
But you're in an apartment that has electricity, it has running water. Whether you are part of the society, you're still part of the infrastructure. And therefore, because you are benefiting from the things that are acquired when people live in groups, being society, there's things that come along with that, whether you like it or not, need to be applicable to everybody, or at least should be more generalized.
So then you would probably modify your position somewhat and say, well, the Affordable Care Act should take into consideration more activities, more propensities. I mean, for example, people who drink heavily, people who like to go skiing, people, let's say, who use drugs, all of these things, not just smokers.
I would say that government should be looking to improve the general lot of society as a whole, and therefore it's in the best interest of the government and society to have a healthy population.
A healthy population. What about the idea? Well, first of all, in terms of, there have been a bunch of independent studies, and these are not paid for by the tobacco companies and not paid for by the government, by some prestigious organizations like the Rand Corporation, which is a been around a while. And
I'm aware of Rand.
I'm not that aware of it myself, so.
They're a fascinating place.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Really? Well, tell me a little bit about Rand.
Well, since we're on the air, I feel like I might not have enough facts on.
Well,
on point, but
we don't
I
have to be
recall,
yeah.
I recall reading, because I have a degree in political science.
Oh boy, I didn't know that.
And so the Rand Corporation actually published a lot of papers in the 70s and 80s, I believe, that helped push towards basically America outspending the Russians. Or the
some of
Soviet
these,
Union
yes,
in
right.
terms of things, technologically speaking. So, for example, I believe the Rand Corporation was in favor of the Star Wars program
really?
and other technological advances to push that side of the economic battle between,
Well,
the Soviet Union and the
some
United
of the
States.
best studies on this subject have been done by but not just the Rand Society, and to some degree the government scapegoats smokers. Like, it puts out these massive numbers of how much smoking is costing the country and costing non-smokers, and this tends to build political support for, let's say, raising taxes on smokers and let's say restricting where we can smoke in sometimes draconian ways. But there is some indication, and a lot of economists of all stripes would agree that actually those persons who, for example, may die at the age of 75 or 65 even, tend to cost the government and society much less money than those people who live healthily into their 90s and for example, take Medicare and Social Security and private from the age of 65 to 90, so that scapegoating smokers and saying that smokers are costing society money is actually inaccurate. What do you think of that argument?
To a certain extent, I agree that it's unfair to say that. I mean, with extending lifespans, which is going on all around the world, but especially in America right now, obviously the cost of healthcare, I think, is the biggest issue that we always are talking about, which is
Yes. Well, it's a big issue.
It is an extremely big issue because you
Right.
have this massive thing that is necessary in the country. You need people to be able to go and get diagnosed and be,
Yes.
The medical thing is I don't know if you'd consider it a basic human right, but that's pretty close.
I mean, well, I don't know. That's a completely different question because I'm asking something very specific. Do smokers cost society money, or do they contribute more than they take from it vis-a-vis medical care? That now, according to the Rand Corporation and according to a lot of other studies, when you factor in tobacco taxes, now, for example, Massachusetts makes, according to the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, which is an extremely anti-smoking group, close to $1 billion a year from its smokers, because other people don't pay tobacco taxes.
Yes.
So if you factor that in, and then you factor in that smokers supposedly live shorter lives than non-smokers, and that non-smokers, just because you don't smoke doesn't mean you're not going to get very sick and end up, getting something like Alzheimer's, where you're in the hospital for 15 or 20 years and you're living to be 95, costing far more than some poor slob who happened to enjoy his Newports and died at the age of 70. So I'm saying that, is it accurate to scapegoat? Well, let me take away that word scapegoat. Is it accurate to I mean, if it's not true, certainly you would not approve of saying that the government's saying that smokers cost society money.
Yeah, I mean, if it's on paper, then I definitely think it's disingenuous, and it's fear-mongering among the anti-tobacco people. And it's the same thing with the anti-drug people, saying that if you go and buy a bag of weed around the corner, you're supporting Al Qaeda, which was the thing that they were doing.
Was an argument for a while.
Yeah, but it's taking a little bit of reason with the medicine. So if indeed this is true, I haven't seen.
If what I'm saying is accurate.
If what you're saying is accurate, then I 100% agree that it's nonsense to claim that if it is not true.
But it's very helpful, because the anti-smoking movement has very deliberately decided that they would make smoking and smokers socially unacceptable, and of course using the argument that that when I'm outside smoking a cigarette in the cold, people can walk by me and say, that guy is costing us money, we are subsidizing him for his foolish habits. So the government, it's effective in terms of stigmatizing smokers.
Yes. And I don't agree with that tactic. Now, do I think that what I like is like something that they are doing in Australia, which is they're saying if you were born after a certain point in time, you will not be eligible to buy cigarettes when you become of age. Personally, if I could go back in time and not have that first pack of cigarettes, I think I might be inclined to not have that habit, because even, I've gone through stretches of 3 months, 6 months, and it's always in the back of my head.
Let me ask you a question. I know this is a very personal question. How old are you?
I'm 30.
You're 30.
I just turned 30, yeah.
Don't trust anybody over 30. We used to say that, right? But now it's 70.
Oh yeah, of course it is.
But my question to you is then, you're 30 years old. To me, you look reasonably fit. Your complexion isn't too bad. Your eyes are not like, terribly watery or bloodshot or anything. I mean, do you think that those persons who are your peers in terms of age, who have never smoked, are in so much better health than you are?
Well, it's an interesting question it's interesting that you would ask that question, because at Christmas time, my mother actually who was sitting next to me. She's a pharmacist over at Beth Israel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sitting next to me, listening to my breathing
Oh,
pattern,
dear.
she
Oh,
could
dear.
tell that I've been smoking again, and she called me out on it.
Oh, really? Well, okay. I mean, I certainly can't tell about your breathing.
Apparently, I
pattern
have a
right
tell.
now.
I take a very deep inhale every couple of breaths, and she said that
I
that
just
is.
took a deep inhale. I guess I'm a smoker. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
But and the reason that she said that is she sees people in the wards who are COPD or people
Yes, I know COPD. Yes.
who have been suffering from years and years of smoking, and she says this is just the beginning. The cough.
Well,
the
she
little
could,
bit
she could, she
shortness
could
of
also
breath.
be an alarmist. Because there are plenty of people, I know plenty of people who have never smoked, plenty of people who have given up smoking and gotten sick and died or gotten sick from all manner of illness. And then, and then other people who smoked and
Like
were
George
healthy.
Burns.
He was over 100.
Yeah, I think he was 101 when he died.
Right. So I think your mother might be a little bit alarmist and might be.
And also a little motherly,
Well,
obviously.
right, but okay. Here's another argument. I'm throwing all my arguments against you. Out of my
And I appreciate
quiver.
that, Steve.
Don't you think it? Well, thank you. Don't you think? Thank you for coming on and listening to me. Listen. Don't you think it's possible that a lot of times people who smoke, well, if they gave up smoking, they might end up doing something worse.
I definitely think that it's a compulsive habit, and people use it for different benefits. For example, for me, it was always stress relief as well as a way to segment the amount of work that I'm doing. And
Yeah.
so, in a past life, I did renovations and painting and light construction,
Oh, right,
light carpentry.
right.
And so I would show up and I'd be doing an exterior of a house in the summertime. I would plan my day as to I would get this much done and then have a smoke break, and then get that much done and have a smoke break. And I was an extremely effective painter, and it was a good way to pace yourself. But at the same time, there's while you could argue whether or not smokers cause more money to the cost of healthcare on society and all that,
Right.
the act of smoking is detrimental to your health over time.
Over time. Right. Living is detrimental to your health over time.
No, absolutely. Breathing air, oxygen
Right.
is a corrosive thing.
For example, Harold Washington, who was the first black mayor of Chicago, and he was a rather chubby guy, and I don't think he, took good care of himself, and he eventually, because I guess he was being pestered, quit smoking. I think he gained a gargantuan amount of weight and dropped dead of a heart attack.
Yeah.
So, that's like the operation was a success, but the patient died.
Yeah. Look, there's no way to go around and say this is the ultimate way to live and this is the only way, and when you do this you'll be healthy and live forever.
Right.
Because it's as much the choices you make, the genetics inside of you, which you didn't have a choice of, and also the environmental stuff that you don't get a choice of, which is what you're breathing. Like, for example, since we live in the city,
Right.
particulates from exhaust, from diesel, from automobiles, all that stuff, even if it's in infinitesimal amounts, it's all amounting to, harming the body in one way or another.
Right.
However,
And time
I
harms the body. Also.
yeah, of course.
Eventually,
But I
eventually
would
the body
say-
gives out.
I would say that the argument against smoking cigarettes is kind of similar to the argument against driving 100 miles an hour on the pike at midnight.
Well, okay. Here's a very, very significant difference. Okay, and this is like the difference that, for example, Dr. Michael Siegel, who is kind of a critiquer of the anti-smoking movement, even though he's in it, he thinks it goes too far. For example, he said, if you are in a car and you have a child in the car, and you don't put the seatbelt on, and you get into an accident, the child could be killed instantly. Now, if you're in a car and you're smoking, and you expose your child to a lot of smoke in the car, that child, the percentage that child, according to the anti-smokers, in 30 or 40 years might have a slightly higher chance of getting lung cancer or heart disease than not. But it's not an acute danger. The child is not going to drop dead from being exposed to even heavy amounts of secondhand smoke. It's never happened. So there's the difference between driving your car 100 miles an hour and smoking a cigarette, you know, right? Do you buy that or do you not buy that?
I guess maybe that isn't the best analogy that I
Right.
made. However, I still think that maybe it's not as drastic as like speeding or playing Russian roulette. You're still actively upping your chances of
We're talking-
problems down the road.
Yeah, right, you might be, but okay, let's say that's a reasonable argument. I certainly can't, but, you know, we're talking about 40, 50 years. I mean, the average smoking-related death, if you believe the anti-smoking groups, is in 70s. You know, the average death of an opioid overdose or an automobile accident associated with alcohol, are suicide, homicide. All of these things are gun violence. I mean, we're talking about people in their 20s and 30s.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
not talking, you know, if some old geezer croaks and say, oh, geez, poor Joe, I knew the smoking would get to him, and he's 78 years old. I mean, what's the big deal? That's very different than how many 1,200 heroin overdoses, and probably most of those people were under the age of 40
Absolutely.
last year. We're talking a very, very different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
So smoking is something that, you know, does not pose an acute danger.
Not immediately. Well, it's is it that much worse than drinking if you're not going to go driving? You know, does the equivalent use of being a heavy drinker as to a heavy smoker the damage to the lungs versus the liver?
Right, over a long period
Over
of
a
time.
long period
Very
of time.
long period of time. And should the government intervene to the extent it's doing in either of those
Well,
cases?
I think that the government might be a little beating up on the smokers a little too much and maybe not paying enough attention to people who are either drinking too much or just in general the substance abuse problem in this country.
And also another big difference between smoking and these other what you might call activities or ingestions that increase risk is that smoking does not impair your judgment. So we've had some of the greatest writers of the 19th and 20th century were heavy smokers. I mean, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Does that name ring a bell to you?
How about one of my favorites, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who spent, after he left the White House, spent the remainder of his life drinking and smoking himself to death. Because
Actually, he
could.
gave up smoking.
Oh, did he?
He gave up smoking, and he used to, unfortunately, I think it was a bad idea. He didn't take care of himself. He grew his hair long like a hippie. Did you know that?
Yeah,
Not-
I've seen.
Not like down to here, but
Man, he got.
he had a lot of problems. I mean, but I mean, in terms of, you know, he did what he was it was a bad time to be president. Let's put it that way. But he used to make. I don't like to speak ill of the dead, but Lyndon Baines Johnson used to make fun of Lady Bird because he was able to quit smoking, and Lady Bird was unable to commit smoking.
Really?
And Lady Bird lived into her 90s, and Lyndon Baines Johnson, I think, died about at the age of 65.
Yeah, I'm not sure how old he was.
Well, he was under.
Yeah,
I think he was under 70.
But yeah.
I remember where I was when Lyndon Baines Johnson died because I was driving a cab.
No kidding. You're a cab driver.
Yeah, well, in a short period of time. I mean, I'm much too illustrious a person to be a cab driver for a long period of time.
Clearly.
That was it. No, I enjoyed driving a cab, but when we used to put the cabs away at the end of the day, have you ever driven a cab?
No, my dad was a cab driver.
Well, for a long period, or
No, just for a brief period when he first came.
it's
to the
a
States.
great job because the dispatchers are always Weisenheimers, and I remember over the microphone over the radio, the dispatcher said, and when we used to put the cabs away at the end of the night, we used to pack them away because we had to park them in a tight area, and he just said, he said, Lyndon Baines Johnson has just packed it away. over the air. And of course, I was with a passenger, and the passenger had no idea what it was. And I chuckled because we had a great cab dispatcher who was ornery as anything, but everybody loved him.
Yeah.
So I would suggest at some point in your life driving a cab. I don't think
I
it's the
thought
same
about
as,
it.
I don't think it's the same as Uber.
No, I'm not interested in that game.
But so you sound like a little bit of a throwback then.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as saying, a Luddite or a Neo-Luddite, but I don't know what the rush is,
You mean to
to turn everything into a computer.
right. Like cars are basically computers on wheels.
Yeah, and then same thing in the hi-fi industry. All of the new stuff that's coming out is more or less glorified computers that really can't be repaired.
Well, let me ask you. You must find. I mean, does every time you have a cigarette, do you feel guilty?
It's funny. I always find it to be a situation where I want it, and I light up, and about halfway through, I start to get a little bit of feeling of a regret, or kind of like why am I doing this to myself?
Well, listen, we got to sign off now, and thanks for coming on.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on, Steve.